Lois Frank had been looking for a job for several days. The woman was willing to take on virtually any job so as to improve her deplorable financial situation as soon as possible. Having found herself below the poverty line, Lois felt that if she didn't do something about it, and soon, she would end up having to beg on the street, which was completely unacceptable to her. At 23, the woman had already seen the worst in life, which treated her so very cruelly. 6 months ago, she was working as a salesperson in a household appliance store. Unfortunately, Lois couldn't even suspect at the time that she would soon find herself in such debt that it would be virtually impossible for her to repay it. The devious store owner colluded with the manager to take a large shortfall worth several thousands of dollars in order to accuse Lois of fraud and criminal negligence. The loss of computers worth a lot of money allegedly happened during the woman's shift, which in reality was simply impossible. It took the honest and naive woman too long to realize that she had been set up. Now the owner was going to get both the money and an employee who would be working for free to pay off her fictitious debt. Lois paid back the money the owner claimed that she owed him, but no one really knew what price she had to pay for it. In order to pay off the debt, the woman didn't just work 16 hours a day for 2 months, but also sold her dilapidated house, which she got from her mother. Now she had to move to a rented housing. Moreover, Lois had to show character and kick out her alcoholic stepfather, who hadn't worked anywhere for several years and led an immoral lifestyle. Having paid off the dastardly store owner, Lois realized that henceforth she needed to be more careful when choosing her place of work. Studying the job ads in the newspaper, the woman decided to avoid anything that involved dealing with money. Lois was about to opt for the job of a cleaning lady when she saw a rather tempting offer. Nurse needed for a paralyzed man. No specific knowledge required, but basic medical skills would be an advantage. High salary. For inquiries, please call the number below. Lois read aloud. Without thinking too long about it, the woman decided to try her luck at this job. That could be explained by the fact that Lois didn't just want to get a job, but also had experience in handling medical equipment and taking care of patients. Her mother used to be a nurse in a surgical department and taught her daughter the basics of her profession as a junior medical worker. Natalie Parker died 3 years ago, which couldn't but leave an imprint of sadness and grief on the soul of her daughter. Many years ago, Lois couldn't understand why her mother was teaching her to give injections, take blood pressure, and put in IVs. At that time, the young woman thought that she would hardly ever find a use for such specific skills, and therefore she felt that she'd be better off spending her time learning something applicable in her life. But now, having seen this job ad, the woman mentally thanked her mother for the skills she needed for it. Lois called the number from the ad and got all the details before agreeing to take the job. The next day, she was already standing at the door of a luxurious 2-story mansion located in the elite part of the city. Impeccable lawn, a beautiful terrace for relaxing in the fresh air, a swimming pool and a tennis court struck the imagination of the young woman who'd only seen such luxury on TV. Trying to overcome her natural shyness, Lois touched her mother's pendant for good luck. She had been wearing it for many years. Finally, the woman knocked on the door. She had to wait for quite some time. Eventually, she heard someone's footsteps on the other side of the door. When the door opened, a well-groomed woman of about 40 appeared in front of Lois. She had a Hollywood smile and unnaturally full lips. "You must be the nurse. You look just like I imagined you would," the woman said without an actual greeting and stretched sweetly, trying to suppress a yawn. She sounded so tactless that Lois immediately felt the difference between herself and the artificial beauty who behaved like she owned the world. "Yes, it's me, ma'am. I hope you'll decide to give me the job," Lois answered politely. "Yes, of course. Why not? My husband isn't picky. Even if you don't know how to give injections, you'll have a great opportunity to learn. The woman answered quite indifferently, which surprised Lois even more. The young woman had never seen anyone be so indifferent when talking about their loved one, especially someone who needed medical help. As it turned out a little later, the homeowner's name was Vanessa Robinson, and her husband's name was Howard Robinson. Looking around the house, Lois couldn't help but admire its exquisite decoration and ostentatious luxury. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued to give Lois the tour of the house, acting like a real guide in some museum. It was only at the very end of the tour that Vanessa brought Lois to meet the patient, whom she was actually supposed to take care of. Howard Robinson was a man in his 50s with a sickly, unnaturally pale face and sad gray eyes. Seeing his new nurse, he immediately perked up and looked at the guest with interest. "So, this is Lois. Give her a warm welcome, will you? And if you decide to give her attitude, I'll just leave you here all alone with all your problems," Vanessa said, smiling at her joke. Howard immediately looked extremely discouraged, and having pressed his back against the bed, seemed to have disappeared into it. Lois shivered and looked accusingly at the man's wife. It was all too obvious that Vanessa didn't love her husband. Frankly, she seemed to hate him. I wonder what happened to their relationship. Wouldn't it be easier to get divorced and live their separate lives? Lois thought. Vanessa briefly outlined the nurse's duties, after which she retired to her bedroom. Lois realized that the rich woman was used to spending her mornings in bed and simply didn't have time or the desire to take care of her own husband. It was highly unlikely that Lois was even capable of loving anyone but herself. As soon as she started working, Lois felt sympathy for Mr. Robinson, who turned out to be a very intelligent and courteous man. Howard used to be a talented surgeon, the kind that people had to wait a long time to get an appointment with. The talk of his phenomenal abilities in the field of medicine spread far beyond the state, which contributed to the prestige of the hospital in which he worked. However, it all came to an end when Howard and his wife got into a terrible car accident, which ended in tragedy for the surgeon. In a cruel twist of fate, it was Vanessa who was driving that evening. It was the surgeon's wife who exceeded the speed limit, which caused the car to skid and ended up in a ditch. The passenger side got the worst of it, which is why Vanessa escaped with minor bruises and Howard ended up in the ICU. The spinal injury turned out to be so serious that Howard had to forget about his career as a surgeon and learn to use a wheelchair. His relationship with Vanessa had been rather strained even before the accident, but afterwards it was simply unbearable. Few people knew that Vanessa didn't actually love her husband and only married him for his status and money. Her parents were wealthy people who always wanted to marry their daughter off to an equally wealthy man. Howard Robinson met their criteria. He was a self-made man who achieved success thanks to his talent and determination. The most interesting thing was that having married their daughter off, the rich couple seemed incapable of respecting the young family's boundaries and kept getting involved in their life, trying to make their own adjustment to it. They always supported their daughter, but they treated Howard like a servant and never appreciated his talent. After the accident, Vanessa continued to live her life as if nothing had happened, disregarding her husband's needs. It was rumored that even before the accident, the rich lady had been having inappropriate relationships with various young men, who were most likely her lovers. Now, Vanessa didn't even try to stop herself and outright mocked her husband because of his physical inferiority. And Lois got to witness it all, which couldn't but leave an imprint on her soul. Whenever the woman saw Vanessa's bullying, she wanted to stand up for Howard and put the horrible woman in her place. However, Lois understood that she had no right to intervene, and all she could do was provide Mr. Robinson with the best care she could. Without even realizing when it happened, The nurse grew attached to her patient and began to treat him as if they were related. Frankly, Vanessa didn't care about the qualifications of her husband's nurse. She was even willing to hire someone completely incompetent, only to make Howard's life even more miserable. Trying to improve Mr. Robinson's dull existence, Lois took the man outside in his wheelchair almost every day and spent several hours in the fresh air with him. Since Howard didn't have children, there was simply no one to take care of him, except Lois. One day, they were out on a walk, and the nurse bent down to straighten out the tangled blanket over Mr. Robinson's legs. At that moment, the pendant dangling around Lois's neck got out from her undershirt and got in the woman's way. If it weren't for this little accident, Howard Robinson might have never gotten to see this little piece of jewelry close up. But that day, he got the opportunity to see its every detail. The man suddenly turned pale and clutched his heart with his hand. "Mr. Robinson, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? Are you feeling all right?" Lois asked, looking anxiously into the patient's eyes. Howard started sweating profusely, and his lips began to tremble treacherously. "Yes, Lois, I'm fine. It's the pendant. The one you have on your neck. Where did you get it?" the man asked, having pulled himself together. "Oh, are you talking about this thing? This was my mother's pendant. She died 3 years ago, and I wear it to remind me of her." Lois exhaled with relief. Howard's breathing quickened, which got the nurse nervous again. The woman worried that he could be having a heart attack. I've seen this pendant before. I personally gave it to the woman I loved very much," Howard whispered, having mustered up his courage. The man's eyes filled with tears, caused by the thoughts of what happened to him over 20 years ago. At that time, Howard Robinson had a rather passionate affair with one of the nurses in the surgical department. The woman that stole the heart of the talented surgeon was Louise Parker. She worked as a nurse, but she didn't have much experience back then. Everything happened so quickly that the young people didn't even realize when they fell in love with each other. Unfortunately, their relationship wasn't destined to last long, and the reason behind it was the hospital staff, who couldn't just keep out of it. One of the nurses spread rumors about the affair, and that was how Vanessa's parents learned about Howard and Natalie's relationship. By that time, they were already in control of many aspects of their son-in-law's life and didn't want his marriage to Vanessa to end because of another woman in his life. Using all of their connections, the rich couple got Natalie fired, and Howard got transferred to another hospital. Shortly before parting ways, the young surgeon gave his beloved woman a pendant, the one that her daughter Lois got after her mother's death. In all fairness, it's worth saying that Howard was truly in love with Natalie and had already decided that he would divorce Vanessa. However, the intervention of Vanessa's parents put an end to the young people's relationship. Unfortunately, Howard didn't even know that at the time of their breakup, Natalie was already pregnant. The proud nurse chose not to ruin the career of the talented surgeon, but simply left his life forever. And now, fate gave Howard another chance, a chance to fix what he felt was hopelessly broken. The man realized that Lois was most likely his daughter, and there was no point in denying it. Having listened to Mr. Robinson's incoherent story, the young nurse looked at him with eyes full of tears. "I've been waiting for you for so long, Daddy. Mom never talked about you, so I could only try and guess what you were like," Lois whispered with a sob. At that moment, Howard Robinson felt incredibly relieved that his life had meaning again. After all, deep down, he was already prepared for death, but fate gave him another chance. Upon learning that he had an adult daughter, Howard believed in himself again and even started standing up to Vanessa, whose behavior was simply unacceptable. Mr. Robinson knew that part of the family assets belonged to him by law, and his wife didn't have a right to them. Her greedy parents didn't give the couple a single cent when they were building their house, so the luxurious mansion was built exclusively with Howard's money. Having realized what a mistake she made, Vanessa tried to fire Lois, but Howard didn't let that happen. Moreover, the man didn't just ask Lois to stay, but also demanded a divorce from his wife, followed by the division of property. Vanessa definitely didn't expect such a turn of events, and for the first time in her life, she realized that she had been defeated. The law was on Howard's side, and even her parents' money couldn't influence the court's decision. A week later, Vanessa had to move out of her ex-husband's house and go live with her parents, who were happy to have their daughter back. Meanwhile, Howard and his daughter Lois lived together in the beautiful house, which was rightfully theirs. The man started spending more time in the fresh air, and even despite his disability, he felt truly happy. In turn, Lois took care of her father and knew that at that very moment, her mother was watching them from heaven and wishing her daughter a long and happy life.